Welcome to History Crossroads, where past meets present, and every story reveals a new path through time.
Washington, 1862. A single lantern flickers in an office that smells like leather, old paper, and probably too much coffee. At a desk in the middle of the room sits a man who looks like he's having an existential crisis, but in, a very productive way. On one side of his desk, crisp Union intelligence reports with those fancy War Department seals that basically scream, "We're very important and we know it." On the other side, manuscripts that are literally falling apart. We're talking pages so old they smell like your grandma's attic mixed with a medieval library. They're covered in symbols that look like someone's D&D character sheet got mixed up with an alchemy textbook. And sitting between these two wildly different worlds is Ethan Allan Hitchcock, elbows on the desk, eyes tired but alert, brain somewhere between "how do we stop the Confederates" and "but what does the universe mean?" This guy was a Union general with the focus of a chess master and the curiosity of that one friend who won't shut up about astrology. Except instead of astrology, it's Hermetic philosophy and ancient Egypt, and whether trees have feelings, war and mysticism, strategy and spirituality, blood-soaked battlefields and cosmic truth. Most men fighting this war were trying to save a nation. Hitchcock, he was trying to understand reality itself. You know, casual stuff. Welcome to History Crossroads. I'm Adam, and today we're talking about one of the weirdest, most fascinating people you've never heard of. Buckle up. Ethan Allan Hitchcock was born in 1798 with a name that came preloaded with pressure. His grandfather was the Ethan Allan, Revolutionary War hero, the guy who basically walked up to a British fort and said, "This is mine now." No big deal. So, yeah, young Hitchcock had some expectations to live up to. People would meet him and immediately go, "Oh, you're that Allan's grandson," and he'd have to smile politely while internally screaming. But here's the thing. Hitchcock was not a carbon copy of his swashbuckling grandpa, where Ethan Allan was all charge first, think later. Hitchcock was more think for 3 hours, then charge. But also, what if we don't charge and just contemplate existence instead? Even as a kid, he was that child. You know the one. The kid who asked questions that made adults go, let me get back to you on that. One time, during a family walk, he stopped dead in his tracks and asked why trees grow upward instead of sideways. His mom just stared at him, trying to figure out if she should laugh or schedule a meeting with someone. While other kids were playing with sticks and dirt, Hitchcock was lying in the grass wondering why we exist and whether reality is even real. Fun at parties? Probably not. Destined for an interesting life? Absolutely. Fast forward to young adulthood, and West Point seemed like the obvious choice. A place where all that restless brain power could be channeled into something useful. And he crushed it. Top of his class, natural leader, the whole package. Instructors loved him because he could solve problems with this scary, calm precision. But even at West Point, surrounded by drills, tactical maps, and guys named Bradford, Hitchcock's journals were filled with notes about truth and hidden meanings and the nature of existence. Imagine flipping through a military cadet's notebook and finding Tuesday, artillery practice. Also, what if the universe is a metaphor? Then came the War of 1812, and suddenly everything got real. No amount of classroom prep could have prepared him for the chaos. At Lundy's Lane, he watched men fight in smoke so thick you couldn't see 5 feet ahead. It was loud, terrifying, and nothing like the neat battle diagrams they'd studied. Most soldiers came out of war either hardened or broken. Hitchcock, he came out curious. The violence didn't numb him. It made him ask bigger questions. Why do humans do this? What forces drive us to destroy each other? And is there some deeper structure beneath all this chaos? He wrote in his journal, "There is structure beneath chaos, should we choose to look." Translation: I just survived a literal war, and somehow I'm more philosophical now. His fellow officers joked that he was more likely to solve the meaning of life than follow basic orders. They weren't entirely wrong. This was a philosopher in a uniform, a guy starting to realize that what you see on the surface is just the beginning, and he had no idea how much weirder his life was about to get. So by the 1840s, Hitchcock had climbed the army ranks. He wasn't flashy, no dramatic battlefield heroics, no big speeches, just steady, smart, reliable, the kind of officer you'd actually want making decisions. But behind that calm exterior, the man was over it. The army he'd joined as an idealistic young cadet was starting to look less like a noble institution and more like a bureaucratic nightmare, run by people who cared more about connections than competence. The breaking point came when some deeply unqualified officer got promoted purely because he knew the right people. Hitchcock watched it happen and thought, oh, so merit doesn't actually matter anymore. Cool. 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 He started noticing it everywhere. Talented officers passed over. Incompetent ones promoted. Meetings that should have been about strategy turning into ego contests. He called it the smallness of great men, which is possibly the most dignified way to say everyone here sucks that I've ever heard. There was this one guy, Major Ellsworth, who was basically the embodiment of everything wrong with the system. Charming? Sure. Good at schmoozing with superiors? Absolutely. Actually capable of leading troops? Not so much. But he kept getting better assignments because he knew how to play the game. Hitchcock, meanwhile, was the guy actually doing the work, while Ellsworth collected the praise. Eventually, he just couldn't anymore. So he resigned. Just walked away from his military career. No scandal, no dramatic exit speech, no bridge burning. He simply said, I'm done, and left. People were shocked. You don't just quit the army in the 1840s. It was your whole identity. But Hitchcock needed out. He needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out what actually mattered. And what did he do with his newfound freedom? Did he travel, take up gardening, learn to paint? Nope. He locked himself in his house and read everything. His home turned into what can only be described as a beautiful disaster of books and papers. Hermeticism, alchemy, Rosicrucianism, metaphysics, ancient symbolism. If it was weird and esoteric, Hitchcock was into it. He'd stay up until dawn, reading by candlelight, scribbling notes in the margins like a man possessed. His journals from this period are wild. One page is a philosophical essay, the next is geometric diagrams that look like conspiracy theory mood boards. Then suddenly there's a deep dive into whether Genesis is actually a math equation. Friends started to worry. Is he okay? Should we check on him? Does he know what year it is? But Hitchcock wasn't losing his mind. He was finding it. To him, mysticism wasn't an escape from reality. It was a tool for understanding it. Ancient wisdom, symbolic thinking, hidden patterns, these weren't distractions. They were answers. So was he searching for peace, or just avoiding his disappointment with the army? Honestly, both. And for a while, surrounded by manuscripts and mysteries, he found what he was looking for. A quiet life of scholarship, where the only politics were the metaphorical kind. It wouldn't last. Then the Civil War happened, and the Union government was like, hey, remember that weird guy who quit the army to read dusty books? We need him back. Because here's the thing. When your nation is literally tearing itself apart, you need smart people. And Hitchcock, despite spending years deep in mystical philosophy, was really smart. Lincoln and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton weren't looking for another battlefield general. They needed someone who could make sense of chaos, spot patterns, and basically be the Union's intelligence guy before intelligence guy was really a job. Hitchcock felt torn. On one hand, comfortable life, interesting books, no one shooting at him. On the other, his country was in crisis. Duty won. He came back quietly, no fanfare, and got to work. His new job was basically this: take fragmentary, contradictory, confusing intelligence and turn it into actionable strategy. Intercepted letters, prisoner statements, coded messages, random rumors from border towns, all of it landed on his desk, and he was scary good at it. While other officers saw noise, Hitchcock saw a signal. He'd noticed that 3 different reports mentioned the same weird weather detail and go, "Oh, they're planning something." He'd track word patterns, analyze gaps in railway schedules, build psychological profiles of Confederate commanders. One time, several contradictory reports came in about Confederate movements. Most officers dismissed them as unreliable. Hitchcock spotted a subtle pattern everyone else missed, raised the alarm, and Union forces reinforced just in time to avoid disaster. Nobody wrote his name in the reports, but the people who mattered knew. What made him different wasn't just attention to detail, it was his mindset. He approached intelligence the same way he approached ancient texts, assuming truth was hidden, waiting to be decoded. He wrote, "Truth reveals itself in fragments, but fragments have their own geometry," which is a very fancy way of saying, if you stare at the puzzle pieces long enough, the picture appears. So, by day, he's analyzing Confederate dispatches. By night, he's back to his mysticism books. And here's the weird part. The 2 things helped each other. His philosophical work sharpened his analytical skills. His military work grounded his theoretical thinking. There's this amazing story where he paused a military briefing to point out that Confederate troop movements matched a geometric pattern from an Egyptian manuscript. The other officers looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Stanton, who had 0 patience for mystical nonsense, just asked, "Does that help us win the war?" Hitchcock, "Yes." And it did. After one exhausting night shift, an officer muttered, "I need coffee, not cosmic truth." Hitchcock smiled and said, "Sometimes they're the same thing." He became the Union's secret weapon, a mind in the shadows, guiding strategy without ever appearing in the spotlight. Invisible, indispensable, and just a little bit otherworldly. Lincoln's war machine had a philosopher at its heart. And honestly, that might have been exactly what it needed. So, if Hitchcock's days were all military intelligence and Confederate ciphers, his nights were something else entirely. Picture this. He finishes a long day decoding enemy communications, heads home, and immediately dives into biblical allegory and ancient mysticism. Because why unwind with a drink when you can unwind with the secrets of the universe? His colleagues joked he could find hidden meaning in a grocery list. They weren't wrong. Hitchcock believed the Bible wasn't just religious history. It was a coded manual for understanding reality. Genesis? Not a creation story, but an allegory for consciousness. Exodus? Metaphor for spiritual transformation. He read scripture the way other people read mystery novels, looking for clues. His desk was absolute chaos. Military dispatches next to Rosicrucian texts, Confederate letters beside diagrams, linking Bible verses to mathematical harmonies. It looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream setup, except everything actually made sense if you followed his logic. He wrote, "Scripture is not history, but symbol. Its truth hidden not by intent, but by the limits of human understanding." Basically, the Bible is an instruction manual, and humanity lost the user's guide. He was also super into alchemy, but not the turn lead into gold kind. He saw it as a metaphor for self-improvement. The alchemical process, not about chemistry, about you, transforming your base self into something refined, like spiritual personal development with cooler imagery. Visitors to his home were always thrown off. They'd expect a general's office, maybe some maps, a flag, normal stuff. Instead, they'd walk into what looked like a wizard's study. Books everywhere, papers stacked in precarious towers, diagrams that resembled occult art projects. One visitor wrote, "It was as though he lived in two realms at once, never fully belonging to either." Accurate. Some friends found it fascinating. Others were genuinely concerned. Is he okay? Should we stage an intervention? Does he know the war is still happening? But here's the thing. Hitchcock wasn't escaping into mysticism. He was using it as a tool. His philosophical framework helped him understand patterns, motivations, hidden meanings, all skills that made him better at intelligence work. While other generals relaxed with whiskey, Hitchcock relaxed by decoding ancient numerology, different strokes, and honestly, his weirdness made him more effective. He expected complexity. He anticipated misdirection. He understood that the obvious answer was rarely the right one. One friend joked that Hitchcock was the only person alive who could analyze enemy troop movements and ancient mysticism in the same sitting, and nail both. The duality wasn't a weakness. It was his superpower, because in a war defined by chaos, Hitchcock brought something rare: clarity, the ability to see structure where others saw randomness. His colleagues laughed at the mysticism stuff, sure, but they also relied on him deeply, because whether he was decoding a Confederate cipher or a biblical metaphor, the man found answers. And in the middle of America's bloodiest conflict, that made him irreplaceable. When the war finally ended, Hitchcock did what he'd always done: slipped away quietly. No victory speeches, no memoir tour, no positioning himself for political office. He just went home. While other officers fought over promotions and pensions, Hitchcock returned to his books, back to the manuscripts, the symbols, the questions that nobody else seemed interested in asking. But here's the sad part. He knew he'd been overlooked. He'd been crucial to the Union's intelligence efforts. His insights had shaped major decisions, prevented disasters, saved lives, but his name rarely appeared in official reports. The praise went to louder, more visible people. He wrote, "The mind may contribute greatly and yet pass unseen, for sight is drawn to noise, not quiet." Ouch, that one hurts. His post-war years were spent writing, exploring symbolism, ancient philosophy, the hidden architecture of reality. Some of it was beautiful, some of it was deeply lonely. Friends moved on, got political jobs, returned to families, faded into small-town life. Hitchcock stayed in his study, surrounded by papers, chasing truths that felt increasingly distant. Visitors described his home as a place where time moved differently. Conversations would drift seamlessly from military strategy to metaphysics to interpretations of ancient texts. One guest said talking to Hitchcock was like talking to a man who lived half a step outside our reality. Historians still debate who he really was. Visionary ahead of his time, brilliant, eccentric, seeking refuge from a brutal world, both? Probably both. On August 5th, 1870, Ethan Allan Hitchcock died quietly. No dramatic final words, just a lifetime of thought, service, and searching. He left behind a nation that barely knew what he'd done for it, and journals that future generations would find fascinating. His legacy is complicated, which feels right for a man who lived between worlds. He was a soldier who never carried a sword in his greatest battles, a philosopher who navigated wartime intelligence, a seeker of truths both earthly and eternal. And maybe that's why his story lingers, not because he fit neatly into any category, but because he refused to. History is shaped not only by those who shout the loudest, but by those who think the deepest. And though he passed mostly unseen, his questions, and the quiet brilliance behind them, remain. Outro, keep asking questions. So what do we take away from Ethan Allan Hitchcock's story? Maybe it's this: clarity doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes the most profound insights arrive in quiet moments, in journal margins, private reflections, or thoughtful pauses. Hitchcock reminds us that it's okay to exist between worlds, to be serious and curious, to pursue meaning even when the world seems too chaotic to make sense. In our own messy, uncertain times, maybe we need more people like him, willing to look deeper, think harder, and trust that reflection is its own form of strength. Thanks for hanging out with me on this journey into the life of history's most mystical general. I'm Adam, and if this story surprised you, moved you, or just made you go, wait, what? Follow History Crossroads for more forgotten figures and strange mysteries. Find us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, where we keep digging into the hidden histories that make you rethink everything. Until next time, stay curious, ask weird questions, and keep exploring the crossroads where the past whispers to anyone willing to listen. See you next time.